Good afternoon. My name is Gabriella Stern, and I'm the senior editor of Dow Jones Newswires in Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. And you can all hear me, right? Okay, great. Well, we have a great panel today and a great subject. Some of us have been on obesity panels earlier this week, and I can guarantee you that we're going to have an impassioned and substantive discussion today about this incredibly serious subject. The format we're going to follow is going to be pretty informal. I'm going to throw out the first question and just ask our panelists to comment one after another, and I'm encouraging the panelists also to pose questions to each other as we go. I think we'll start, I'm going to introduce everybody, and then why don't we start with you. Antony Burgmans, who is chairman of Unilever, the big food company. Next to him is Tommy Thompson, who's the U.S. Secretary of Health and Human Services. Next to me is Richard Edelman, President and CEO of Edelman PR Worldwide. On my left is Ed Mayo, CEO of the National Consumer Council in the UK. And last but certainly not least is Janet Voûte, who's CEO of the World Heart Federation. So that's our terrific panel, and I'm going to throw out a very easy, non-controversial question to Antony first, which is, should we tax fatty and sweet foods?
We can give you the long version or the short version, but my short version is no.
Medium version.
I think it's absolutely wrong way to go about this. I'm delighted that the WHO has taken a comprehensive, what we call multi-stakeholder approach in this. There may be some areas where we can further improve that report, but I think the strategies which are described there are probably going to lead to a more sustainable solution. I don't think taxing is going to sustain it. We tried tax with tobacco and it didn't work. Yes? So I think what we need is a fundamental review of this problem, and then I think we need to go for it. All the stakeholders who are involved in this, and I think that will have a chance of success. Just trying to tax the problem away won't get you anywhere.
Secretary Thompson.
Well, let me first just start out by thanking you for having the program. I've been coming to Davos for some time, and it's always been on issues that have not been health related. And if we're going to really touch the most important topics of today, you're going to have to talk about health issues, and especially in the area of prevention. I believe that the best way to do it is by collaboration. For the first time now, we have really got people, all walks of life, starting to talk about obesity, about nutrition, and about exercise. And this is an initiative that we got to foster and encourage instead of stifling. And I'm afraid over-regulatory actions, such as taxations and other things, are not going to accomplish the objective that we want. We have a serious problem worldwide, and especially in the United States. In 1991, there was only one state that was above, had 15% above the population that were obese. Today, all but Colorado have states that are above 15% of their population are obese, and it is a growing problem. But I have sat down with the business groups, the consumers, health insurance companies, and so on, and talked about the need to really get involved with exercise, diet, and nutrition. And I have to be able to report to you very favorably that the response has been excellent. And we have seen great progress, such as Unilever, who we were the ones that came out and started asking to have trans fatty acids labeled. And Unilever responded by doing away with trans fatty acids. We've also encouraged the soft drink companies, Pepsi-Cola and Coca-Cola, to come in with more healthier foods. And Pepsi-Cola has gone from 40% of their foods, which are healthy and nutritious, to on their way to 60%. This is a tremendous step forward. And if we keep doing that, I'm confident that we're going to accomplish our objective. And I'm just afraid that the harsh measures, such as over-regulation and taxation, will just have the adverse impact rather than the positive impact that we have going right now. That's why my answer to you is no at this time.
Richard Edelman, should we tax fatty and sweet foods?
No. I think that the big challenge for the food industry is to make good-for-you foods cool and a fundamental part of what kids want to eat. Clearly, Dean Ornish and his research has indicated that people prefer fat and sugar and salt, and that's just the body. But we've got to get the mind to triumph over the physical in a certain way. And there's no question that advertising, PR, lots of these communications techniques have to be used. It has to be repetitive in the same way that HIV has become an important part, HIV prevention. What Viacom's done in terms of putting content into shows about HIV prevention is exactly what could happen if the food industry works in a cooperative way with the media business. This is an issue that kids also have to get up from the PC. Maybe we have to work with Microsoft. Maybe we have to work with the electronics companies just every half an hour just to have a reminder. Did you do your exercise today? It has to be a continuous impression on kids that it's A, cool, and B, you got to be reminded. And the parents have to recognize that they've got to reinforce it and that it is important.
Ed Mayo, how do you feel about the collaborative, nicely, gentle, voluntary approach?
Well, it doesn't here to sort of feel to me like a gentle approach at all, because what we've heard is closed minds. We've heard three people, with respect, all say no. Now, no one is claiming that there are any magic bullets here. There are no single measures that are going to deal with this issue, because we're talking about a very fundamental change that is going to take 10, 20 longer years to a point to which we get a health-promoting economy, and in particular we get to an economy which isn't disabling of the health of children. So it seems to me bizarre to rule out from the start any one measure in the kind of policy toolkit that could take this forward. And in particular, what we do see is that obesity is not just an individual choice, because it has social consequences. The tab for the costs of healthcare in relation to obesity are picked up in general by society. They're picked up by the state, they're picked up by the taxpayer. So in a sense, if we don't recoup some of those revenues by looking at measures such as taxes, and taxes wouldn't be easy to develop, but it certainly would be well worth looking and possible to try. If we don't recoup those costs, then essentially what we're doing is we're subsidizing business to peddle junk food to our children.
And Janet Voûte, how do you feel about the issue?
I'm afraid my answer is maybe. And this will depend, frankly, on the active engagement of the food industry, the fast food industry, media, distribution, all of the supermarket chains. And if there really is the engagement that I've had a chance to see some indications of this week, then maybe we don't have to tax. But if that doesn't happen, if the support is not put in place from industry, then there will be a hue and cry for taxation of these products. And the interesting thing is there are experiments around taxation of fatty, sugary products and snack foods already in the United States, and it's my understanding that there are about 19 combined states and cities who are experimenting with taxation on such products already.
Secretary Thompson, I wondered if you'd comment on, you use the word collaboration, and in recent days there's been coverage of the WHO proposal on obesity and allegations that the U.S. is collaborating with the food and beverage industry to kind of water down the terms. I know that, among other things, the U.S., and you can correct me if I've got this wrong, but the WHO is recommending...
You're wrong.
Ah, okay.
You're wrong.
I'll just ask one little piece of this. WHO, according to press reports, the WHO is saying 10% of the diet, of a person's diet should be, should have sugar in it. U.S. is supposedly saying 30%. WHO says an hour of exercise. U.S. says a half an hour, and so on. So what's really going on?
I just love individuals that have no knowledge of my own personal opinions or knowledge of what the department is doing, making these gross exaggerations. The same way as last year during the World Health Organization when they came out and said that I was in favor of tobacco. And it was me that gave the speech at the World Health Organization in May, asking for people to sign on the agreement. And I led the fight, much to the chagrin of those individuals who were there thinking that I was going to be just the opposite. The same thing is happening this week at the World Health Organization, in which I'm a member of the board of directors. And there's a group of individuals that sat down and made statements that were not truly scientifically based. And I believe very strongly that all of the recommendations coming out of the World Health Organization have to be scientifically based. And the resolution was adopted unanimously with me voting in the affirmative yesterday. And I will be voting in the affirmative in May when it comes up to the full delegates. But the strategies, there has been a request for an additional 30 days in which experts from the National Institutes of Health, which I think by all indications are one of the premier research organizations in the world, the Institutes of Medicine, both of which have come up with different recommendations, scientifically based, should be able to have that science reconciled. And that is the position that the United States has taken, is that all of these resolutions and strategies should be based upon good science. The Institutes of Medicine has said that at this point in time, they do not believe that the calories in the poundage should be based strictly on 10%, which a group of individuals came up with at the WHO. Their scientists and at the Institute of Medicine said it was 25. The National Institutes of Health says that their scientists have based their research on 25 to 30. And so our position is, let's reconcile the science. So not only put out the resolution, but let's put out the strategy that's based upon good, positive, constructive science. And that is what has been requested by the United States. And it is completely different than what has been reported. Now let me quickly go on to say that there's no question that obesity and nutrition are huge issues. And it's been my department in the United States has taken the leadership role. And I personally have taken that leadership role. And I continue to do so. And I continue to collaborate with all groups. Several of the groups in here have been at I can see public television. I can see many business organizations, health insurance organizations, consumer organizations have all been in to see me. And we've had roundtable discussions and collaborations on how we can work together to improve nutrition, obesity, and exercise in America. And those collaborations have played and have paid and will continue to pay great dividends. And I continue to push, and I will continue to push, and I have no reluctance whatsoever of bringing somebody into the woodshed and tell them that I think they have to do more. And I've done that with the fast food industry, I've done that with the Restaurant Association, and will continue to do so. And so far, we've had nothing but positive responses. Not enough, but we're going in the right direction, and we will continue to do so.
Antony Burgmans, have you been taken to the woodshed by Secretary Thompson?
Unilever has a very, very long history, which goes back before the Second World War, of interfacing with government on nutritional issues. The British government, after the war, had an underfed population and an abundance of fish, and they asked us whether we could see to a way of making kids eat fish. And as you know, those of you who are parents, kids don't like fish, until Unilever gave them fish fingers. So this is an example. Secretary Thompson already said that he approached us on trans fatty acids. Science had moved, and science showed that they were an undesirable element in margarine formulations. We decided, when we found this out and the science was proven, on a worldwide basis to start taking these trans fatty acids out altogether. So we have a long history of interfacing with governments all over the world. We do enormous work in the developing world advising governments on nutritional policies, because very often these governments don't have the resources themselves to do so. We have at this moment at work within Unilever something we call the Unilever Health Institute. It's based in one of our large food laboratories in Holland, and it has 3 or 4 stations out there. One in Africa, one in Latin America, and one in Asia. And we're looking at nutritional profiles, which are of course different in different regions, and trying to come up with the science to see whether we need to reformulate our products more in line with what these consumers need on a worldwide basis. Obesity is a real issue. It concerns us. And we need strategies from all walks of life to fight this and to do something about it. And of course, the food industry is one of the players. But let me stress, it's only one of the players. A good company, a responsible food company, has a nutritional policy in place and should be prepared to discuss it if, for instance, Secretary Thompson would express the desire to have a look at it. We've put this in place already a long time. We adapt it when science changes. We've got already for a long time salt and sugar reduction programs in place on many of our brands, as an example. Of course, we have to look on the way we communicate with our consumers. And we have to be sensitive, especially when it comes to children. But don't ban advertising.
That leads me to my next question.
Just ask us to do the advertising in such a way that it promotes healthy lifestyles. And then you turn a negative in your eyes, or some eyes, a negative into a positive force.
Let me ask Ed Mayo, how does one deal with advertising junk food or fatty sweet foods to children, mostly on television during children's hour?
Well, this is a big issue, and I think most parents would be quite stunned by the power and the sophistication and the kind of barrage of marketing and advertising that is focused on children. In one European country, estimates that sort of 95 to 99% of the food products that were being advertised to children, preschool children and primary school children, were essentially kind of junk foods, high in fat, high in salt, high in sugar. So there's an absolute barrage there, and it is an issue. And I've made a note to myself to ask you, Antony, formally after this meeting, to do exactly what you said, because it seems to me that I don't mind how we get there. I don't mind whether it's self-regulation or if self-regulation fails and the woodshed doesn't work, God forbid, Tommy, then we need to move towards a harder saying. But we need to get to that point to change the degree and barrage of advertising that is focused on children. Now, you can compare the codes of responsibility that exist around alcohol to those around junk food. And what you see is that there are much more strict controls around alcohol. So you wouldn't advertise to people in ways that made it feel as if they were more lonely, although they're more likely to meet friends, or that they would be cool if they drank alcohol in that way. So there are good examples that we can draw on. And in fact, the alcohol industry has taken something of a lead in this and has got plenty of good examples to its name. My fear is that much of what we're seeing in the corporate sector remains still icing on a rotten cake. That actually the progress is very, very slow indeed. And while one hears good words, particularly at a senior executive level on these issues, companies are going back and paying lobby groups, PR firms, might one add, in order to combat the public health officials and others that are trying to argue for a sane and sensible approach on here. I mean, we will, in the consumer movement, give credit where it's due. And if Unilever take a lead, if Pepsi-Cola and others take a lead, then I think we will give you credit. Because, in fact, if we don't give you credit, then there's little incentive for you to do so in the marketplace.
So
we'd
what
like
is it you want them to do? Stop advertising food, bad, quote-unquote, food to kids on television, or advertise it differently the way Antony was suggesting?
Well, I think the suggestion of advertising positively, looking at what you can do to promote nutritious food is sort of one part of the equation alongside the exercise. But the level and sophistication of focusing on kind of junk food does need to be framed, and it does need to be reduced. Either one can do that through self-regulation in the way that Antony suggested. So let's ask industry what can be done for a much, much tighter set of controls around advertising to children. Or if that fails, then you can regulate it. But for my money, this is a welcome offer, and I will talk to you later.
Janet Voûte wants to jump in.
Well, what I'd like to say is two things. One, I think we've polarized the argument, and we should not polarize the argument. For whatever reason, we're making it black and white. It's either the individual's responsibility or it's all those horrible government regulations. But there's an enormous middle ground called supportive environments. There's just an enormous potential for collaboration to create supportive environments so that people can exercise. You can't ride a bicycle if there's no bicycle path. You cannot walk if there is no sidewalk. There are experiments in Brazil going on where children are now, they're closing off streets, they're preventing traffic from moving in the city so that children can play football. That is a supportive environment. That's not government regulation. And that's not just individual responsibility. And so I think we've got to develop the concept of supportive environments, which is a collaborative opportunity. Now, the second thing I'd like to say is, what is it that the World Heart Federation really wants the food industry to do? And we recognize you can't do it overnight. We want the food industry to reduce salt and sugar levels in their products. We want the food industry to focus on getting rid of trans fats and focus on fat substitution. And I had an opportunity to say this the other day. Unless anyone gets weak in the knees, you have to look at what's happened in Poland and in Finland. In Poland, the combination of tobacco control and a huge reduction in substitution of animal fats with vegetable fats has resulted in a 40% decline in cardiovascular disease mortality in 10 years. And if you look at Finland, where over a 25-year period, 75% of deaths were eliminated. Why? Because of fat substitution. So these changes in product portfolio and in consumption habits can have huge impacts on people's lives, and they will live longer and better. We'd also like to see progress on simplifying labeling, and I think there's a fair amount of consensus on that. We've got to make it easier to understand. We'd like to focus on energy balance, calories in, calories out, so that people understand that's how they have to live. And of course, if we can start to market the consumption of healthy lifestyles and 5 fruits and vegetables a day, and while we're at it, make healthy choices, easy choices readily available, I think we will have created very, very supportive environments. And then you don't have to go all the way over to the right hand, the government legislation.
Richard Edelman, are you? Oh,
That was exactly what my department's doing.
Which makes me really happy, and I come here to find out.
Well, we've already come out with a program on fruits and vegetables 5 times a day. The Secretary of Agriculture and myself have been out doing that. I put in a new program, Janet, in the United States, much bigger than Brazil, in which we've set aside $15 million, and I've requested $100 million this year, for cities to compete in order to set up walking paths, to set up places in which they can put out information in regards to asthma, obesity, and diabetes, and tobacco. And we're requesting $120 million for a program called Verb, in which is put out by CDC, which is part of my department, for those children between the tweening ages, 9 and 13, to pick a verb and work it out and use that particular thing, $125 million. We also, in those areas, we are put in a new program at FDA, which is also part of my department, that is trying to simplify the labeling. And we are the ones that put out for the first time a request to label trans fatty acids. We're reviewing all of our labels and trying to find ways how to do it, because we believe that consumers would love to be able to follow it. Sometimes they can't understand it. And I don't know if you've ever been in a grocery store. I have been. I looked at the labels. I don't understand it. And if I don't, as a lawyer of the department, I tell them, let's simplify it.
Well, you'd have to walk around with a calculator.
Well, we're doing that. And so all the things you're saying, my department in the United States is trying to do, and we're going to do more.
Terrific.
Richard
And
Edelman.
so you don't need to just look at Brazil. Take a look at the United States and department.
I want to
You'll
give
be
Richard
very
a
happy
chance.
with what we're doing.
I want to give Richard a chance to respond to Ed, who indicated that Richard and other PR firms are kind of enabling the food industry to avoid doing the responsible thing. I guess that was your charge.
You know, you never answer a negative with a negative. And what I really want to tell you is that food companies are using us to tell a story about continuous improvement and commitment to principles. And the idea that, you know, we're somehow doing what, you know, covering up like we, you know, PR firms did for ExxonMobil and trying to create a Valdez kind of situation is ludicrous, I have to say. This is far too important an issue. It's far too much in the public scene. And I don't think it's productive to say, you know, this is a bunch of spin. In fact, I would say that the more you can encourage chief executives of food companies and other companies to go out and talk about what they're doing. I know Secretary Thompson had a roundtable where he had Dow Chemical and Union Pacific and UPS and lots of big companies. And these CEOs should feel empowered to, and in a positive way, get covered by the press if they're doing something good. If they put their parking lots quite far away, as Sprint has, so that the employees have to walk a mile to get to the office, or if they turn off the elevators so people have to walk the 4 or 5 floors, you want to create a positive construct for these chief executives and lionize them and actually also give materials to the employees, because the most actually credible source is average people like me. Peer-to-peer communication is much more credible than top-down. Top-down is important to get the start, but then give material to the employees. Even somehow give employees the way to create home economics courses in their local high schools so kids learn how to, you know, cook again. I'm sure you would be in favor of that.
I certainly would.
Right, because families are not preparing meals. Someone the other day said the average preparation time for dinner has gone from 2 hours, I guess, in the 50s to 15 minutes. Did you want to say something, Ed?
Well, that point about cooking time, you know, relates also to the fact that this is not purely a kind of a European and a North American phenomenon, that obesity and kind of the transition in terms of nutrition, often going from cases of kind of malnutrition and micronutrient deficiencies, then into, you know, to a situation of obesity is very worrying. And countries like kind of, you know, Egypt, Mexico, South Africa, I believe, have obesity rates that are higher
India.
than those in the States. India, and that also kind of connects to other quite deep issues, urbanization. You know, if you're working far from home, it's more difficult to find the opportunity costs of cooking are much higher. But that does also relate to an issue that obesity is one marker and one indicator of poverty. Okay. And this is why, to my mind, the kind of heroic voluntarism, which I also welcome, but give a cautionary tone that this is not enough. We need to look more deeply at some of these issues, because if poverty is closely related to obesity, then it's got to touch on much wider issues of building the competence, the literacy, the economic space, the livelihoods whereby people can support themselves in terms of healthy choices.
And one other issue in poor communities is very often the only restaurants nearby are the fast food outlets. They're cheap, they're available, and the supermarkets are inadequate. That's been a problem. You can't get, they're low-grade supermarkets, they don't have the fresh fruits and the vegetables.
That's certainly true. But I would like to say, I mean, the consumer movement and the public health movement more widely, I mean, this is not a new issue. This is an issue that people have been, you know, working on for a good deal of time, and there's many eminent scientists that have contributed a huge amount to that. And, yeah, I mean, it makes me think at this point in time of the saying of Mahatma Gandhi, who said, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, and then you win. I'm not quite sure what point we're at, but I must say it doesn't feel quite as positive as was put.
Except that
because
question
I see,
is
because
this
I see,
an us versus them? Remember, the food companies are also feeding us, right?
I don't think it's us versus them. I think it's a question of responsibility, and like many of the emerging issues around responsibility, human rights, treatment of people with disabilities, sustainability, it challenges everybody to go beyond what their position is at. But I have to call, you know, when I see the kind of fingerprints of the sugar industry over the kind of science, when I face in the work that I do advising, you know, health ministries in the UK, the direct opposition of not individual companies, actually, some of whom are doing very good work, but the kind of the industry lobby groups that tend to work to the lowest common denominator, you know, I have to call those as I see them.
Let's let Antony respond and then Janet.
Yeah, look, I must say I have to object. I see here a whole series of cliches. Yes, and I think Gandhi, this great man, one of the great people of the last century, has been completely misquoted, and I take objection to that. This issue is serious. This issue is so complex that we need all the forces we can muster in order to resolve it. If we regress into behavior which is characterized by adversarial behavior, we don't stand a chance of winning this battle. So I think it starts with the acknowledgement, is it a problem or not? The food industry has said, yes, it is a problem. And we are prepared to do something about it, and we are prepared to become part of the solution rather than part of the problem. Then I think food companies can create the alliances and the platforms that it can start working. But if you think that it is only the foods industry who can resolve this issue, wrong. It is not possible, because obesity is the result of a complete change of lifestyle which we have seen over the last 50 years. Should we, for instance, request people to remove their television sets from all the homes so that people do not sit in the evening 3 hours on a couch and watch television? Should we ask the software industry to destroy the products they make because it allows our children to surf the web 2 hours a day? Should we start blaming government for making sure that the streets are not safe anymore so parents don't send their kids in the streets to play soccer? When I was a young kid, I was playing soccer every day on the streets. Doesn't happen anymore. This already indicates how complex this issue is. We need awareness, and we need all the forces we can muster, whether it's government, whether it's private industry, whether it's NGOs, and together in a collaborative way, science-based, we must try and tackle this issue. Otherwise, we will end up in a lose-lose situation.
Janet, forgive me, but I think that Secretary Thompson needs to have a chance to respond. Are you in the pocket of the sugar industry?
I just love the temperature and the type of questions you've asked. That is absolutely an absurdity. And the way they even ask the question, you're trying to elicit a negative response. Let me just tell you some of the things that I'm doing, moderator. In the United States right now, we spend $155 billion a year on tobacco-related illnesses. 400,000 Americans die, 442,000 to be exact. We spend $135 billion a year on diabetes. 17 million Americans are diabetic. 16 million more are pre-diabetic. 16 million have type 2 diabetes. And how do you cure it? You cure it by diet, losing 10 to 15 pounds, and exercising, 30 minutes a day of walking. The fastest growing illness, the fastest growing disease in America is obesity, $117 billion. And ever since I've taken over as secretary, I have been out championing, out talking, articulating a vision for America to improve the quality of health. I put my whole department on a diet. I've lost 15 pounds. My secretary has gone down 7 dress sizes. A young person I brought from Wisconsin has lost 110 pounds. She lost a whole person. I have different divisions. Competing with one another, trying to find out who is the best. I'm taking this challenge now government-wide. I'm challenging all of the departments in the federal government to lose weight and to exercise. I also hand out pedometers. And if you're a little bit nicer before the program is over and ask me some of the positive things we're doing instead of the negatives, I'll give you one. And I ask people to do 10,000 steps a day. And if you want to lose a pound, you do 12,000. And I also, it's easy to point fingers and criticize, but let's take a look at the problem. This is a serious problem. And unless we all work together, as Antony says, we're going to lose. And I tell the business community, your biggest problem in the United States is health insurance and high costs of health. And if you really want to do something about it, let's take a look at the health situation in America. 125 million Americans have one or more chronic illnesses. 3 out of $5 go to chronic illnesses. And the easiest way to drive down health costs and drive down your health expenditures is to get your employees in shape. Set aside some time each day to allow them to exercise. Set aside some time to educate them about diet and nutrition. And I ask the health insurance companies, put out a credit so that if your company is improving in as far as the health from one year to the next, they get a credit. And you will find that you're going to do better. Pepsi-Cola came in, and I talked to them, and I says, why don't you expand your healthy foods? Do you know that they've gone from 40 to 60%? You know why? Because right now, they're making money. The bottom line says that their healthier foods are what Americans want. We need to do this worldwide. And I would like the Consumer League, I would like you as a moderator to start looking at the positive things we're doing and how we can work together instead of trying to divide us. I would like to hear from the public relations people, Mr. Edelman. How do we convey a positive message? How do we get mothers and fathers to go out walking with their children in the evening? How do we make sure after school at night that they play football, not soccer, football, and be able
Wait a minute.
and be able to learn about physical activity and get away from the computer and television? Let's start looking at how we can work together to positively change people's attitudes and image. Let's take tobacco. 40 years ago, nobody had the courage to stand up. We finally decided that tobacco was causing a lot of illnesses and a lot of problems all around the world. We have gone from 40 years ago when huge percentages, 65 to 70% of people were smoking. We're now down in America below 30%. That's a positive thing in 40 years. And we're working together to find ways to improve that. Let's do the same thing about obesity, about diabetes and asthma, and find ways in how we can publicize it and start convincing Americans and people worldwide all over Europe to purchase healthy foods and to exercise. It is common sense, and there's so much positive things going on. Let's not try and bring it down to the lowest denominator. Let's try and build it up and be positive about making it all positive.
Ed, do you feel you were bringing it to the lowest denominator when you made that accusation?
I think that what's been said is entirely welcome, and this is, as I said at the outset, this is a long process. It's going to involve very, very different groups engaged in many different ways. We're going to have to learn as we go and translate that good practice across. My objection was the ruling out of certain options from the start. An idea that purely one way of doing it, which I characterise as the woodshed, is the only way to do it. And I think we need to look more widely. But that's really my sense. And the issue of no, let me leave it there. I welcome what's been said. And I'd like to see kind of just more openness in terms of some of these other options that are there. We're working in 98 schools in a kind of city called Edinburgh, which is in Scotland, as part of a Scottish community diet project that we've been running for many years. And this is working with both kids and their parents in terms of getting access to fruit and learning about access to kind of healthy diet. These kinds of projects are small scale. What we've learned is that you can do a lot at that level, but you also have to look at this wider infrastructure, which is set by policy, what Janet talked about, in terms of the social contexts. Are the roads going to be safe when the children get out and away from the TV to play cricket?
Janet.
Okay. I haven't heard any women's sports yet. You know, I want some women's sports here on the table.
Soccer?
But anyway, yeah, soccer. Okay, well that's true.
Football?
Women's soccer. Let me try and put this on a positive note. I think we're at a unique time that the WHO strategy on diet, physical activity, and health. I think the WHO, the World Health Organization, is to be congratulated. This is a very different effort than what took place on tobacco. Now, the issues are equally serious. Tobacco control is critical to the reduction of cardiovascular disease, and so is obesity. But this time, this is a strategy. And it is a strategy that the World Health Organization, and it's a process in which they've engaged industry. Now, for those of you who don't know the World Health Organization, that is a big step for them, and it is a great step. It is really a positive step. So I think the two things that really should be recognized is that this is a global strategy to get people to focus on the obesity issue, and that is for the world over, not just for the developed countries, but for low and middle income countries, that it is a collaborative effort involving industry, and that it is not a treaty. It's not binding on governments. So it doesn't have to go through all of the steps and labor of creating a treaty. It actually leaves governments the decision on how to implement policies. And I think that's critically important. If I can go back to one thing that was said earlier, This is a global issue, and let me just illustrate that for a second. If you look in Beijing, 20% of children are obese. If you look in Brazil, obesity rates in children have tripled over 3 years. If you look in Malaysia, the same thing has happened. I was just there last week, and 3 years, this is adult obesity tripled since 1995. And the interesting one is, let's talk about Africa for a second. In a South African rural area, you will find obesity and underweight coexist, and that both can be malnourished. And they not only coexist, they can coexist in the same family. You can have an overweight mother and an underweight baby who is malnourished, and neither one knows quite what they should do in terms of nutrition, nor do they have access. So if you look at those different situations, the national governments and the players in a country must decide for themselves how they solve the problem. The solutions will be unique to the country, and I think this strategy effort gives all the control to the national governments and the national stakeholders, and it simply sets some guidelines and makes some recommendations on what can be done.
Great, and Richard, and then we'll go to questions.
Okay, 2 quick points. Secretary Thompson asked, what could be done in the communication sphere. I have 2 thoughts. One, I think we have to move away from the notion that writing about or covering obesity, if you talk about a fat person, it's a matter of discrimination, and it's a matter of intolerance somehow, that you're saying the person is fat. It gives me an example. I just heard this from a friend from the UK at lunch. The idea that for Teletubbies, which is a big show in the UK, it's cute to be chubby. It's fine. It's not only fine, it's better. It's preferred. This is what 3-year-olds are seeing. It's cute. Popular culture has to embrace the idea of being healthy as opposed to, fat being discriminatory. Okay, second point. I think we have to move away in the world from a culture of glorifying specialization. What do I mean by that? I heard from someone at a dinner at Davos that there's a real effort at a school in New Jersey to allow people who are excellent pianists or something else to practice piano during what is mandatory phys ed time, because that person wants to be the best pianist so that he or she can get into Yale. This is amazing to me. Phys ed has to be part of what we do, and also alternative sport. There are a lot of people who are great athletes, like Mehmet. But there are some of us who are always sort of mediocre and mostly were bench warmers. But I got something out of sport. Now let's assume that there are people who didn't like sports. There's some of those too. But there's dance and there's walking and there's other things, and those have to be made into important parts of daily lifestyle. So preaching to the converted.
All right, Q&A time. We have, do we have someone who has a microphone from the World Economic? Oh, yeah, there she is. Okay, well, why don't you start with the person who's right near you? That would be efficient.
My name is Linda Nichols, and I'm the chairman of the Post Office in Australia. I was very interested in Richard Edelman's comment about how peer-to-peer works, and I'm not saying that because Edelman's gave me my first good PR advice, but I wanted to talk about a different dimension of engagement of the corporate community. I think we've heard a pretty big beat-up of the food industry. And what I wanted to share briefly was what we've done at the Post Office in Australia to reduce obesity amongst our 35,000 employees. Now, we didn't do this out of enlightened general social caring. We did it because addressing obesity has made us more money. I think that's an interesting notion to put out to corporates all around the world. What did we do? We came to the view that obesity was impacting our work compensation insurance, that it was impacting absenteeism in the workplace. So what we decided to do was to pay bonuses to work teams who got healthy.
That's interesting.
Okay? And we now have a significant percentage of our employees who have earned one or more bonus by not just they alone getting more exercise and losing weight, but their workplace team achieving improvement goals. So it's Richard's peer-to-peer idea, but it's also in a corporate context. In the pay slips we send out fortnightly to our employees, there are simple, practical ideas about how you and your family can get more exercise or eat better. Now, is it perfect nutrition we're advocating? No, better nutrition. we have a very multicultural workforce. We realize that many of our employees, and if you work for the post office, we have a lot of low-paid blue-collar jobs, had never tasted foods that other people know to be healthy and good nutrition. So in our canteens and cafeterias, we not only decided to give equal shelf space to healthy food, a very radical idea, but we actually have free days when you can taste foods you've never eaten before. We invite parts of our multicultural workforce to put on healthy food fairs, which the company pays for, where you illustrate the foods of your country. So if once upon a time our Italian employees, and Melbourne, Australia is the second largest city in Italy, used to bring cannolis stuffed with cream, that's not what's in the Italian food fair anymore. And similarly with our Vietnamese employees, our Greek employees, and so on. So it isn't about getting everybody to one cuisine. The most radical thing I believe that we have done, and the thing with the highest impact, is we have said to employees who we believe are so obese that they cannot do their job properly, that they are laid off until they lose work and are sufficiently fit to come to work. For a government business enterprise to do this, some may say it is not a career-advancing move. We did have a fellow who was sufficiently obese that he had been unable to put on his steel-toed boots for 3 years, but had a workmate who put his shoes on for him. We said, "I'm sorry, you can't come to work anymore." He became a cause célèbre in Australia known as Fat Boy. It is true we had significant industrial disruption over Fat Boy, but things worked out well for Fat Boy because one of our women's magazines put him on the cover and turned him into a 28-week serial of how Fat Boy lost weight, and he's back at work, and he is very appreciative to what the corporation did because it changed his life. We run health testing in the workplace for diabetes, high blood pressure, and cholesterol. Initially, employees were very suspicious. They thought, oh, if I get a bad score, I'm going to lose my job. But as we repeated the tests in workplace after workplace, we've now had over 85% of our workforce tested, and people who were sick found out. Now, Chairman, I'm sorry to have taken so much time. What I want to hear from the panel is, what are other examples, not of beating up the food industry, but of companies doing positive things that make a difference?
There are several companies in the United States doing similar things, and I want to compliment you. Union Pacific, which is a giant railroad company, had huge workers' compensation premiums that they had to pay each year. They had huge health insurance. So they have set up programs with the union, within the family of Union Pacific. They pay for their employees to have membership in physical education clubs and workout clubs. They put in time each day that employees can work out, and they put in good nutrition habits, and they have lowered their health insurance claims, they've lowered their workers' compensation, and every year they're trying to do more. They have benchmarks under which they try and compete against. You know, if they've lowered the workers' compensation, how much more they can next year, by making the workplace safer, by making the employees healthier. And several companies, I could name a great deal. Kraft, for instance, is doing the same thing. And it's really the forward visionary companies that are doing this. They're saving money on their workers' compensation. They're saving money on their health insurance premiums. They're saving money because their employees are better attuned, better adjusted, and more productive. It makes good business sense. And that's why I'm requesting the health insurance companies to take into consideration when a company does that to lower their premiums. And we're hoping to develop a way in which a health insurance company can be able to market good health insurance premiums for those companies that really lower their costs. And I thank you for your visionary vision, but that's also true in a lot of companies in the United States.
There's a woman over here, and then Dean Ornish has been raising his hand for half an hour. So I'm going to.
Irene Lynch from Ireland, background in education and media, living in Switzerland. I'm very encouraged about what I've heard and very delighted that the Secretary is so passionate about this because he's a very powerful man. What's done in America will be eventually done elsewhere. But I'm worried that you're making this business very complicated indeed. We need to be educated about food. In my school in Ireland, girls were taught home economics. We knew what cheese was. We knew that it composed of 33% approximately carbohydrates, 33% fat, 33% protein. Now, I think today we can tell people for as long as we want to eat healthy food, but if they themselves don't understand what food is made up of, there's no way that that healthy food shelf will be very good. They have to be able to decide for themselves what is good and what is bad. My husband, because he was in an Irish school, boys' school, they were not taught this subject. He has no clue what is good for him unless I tell him. So we have to go back to the schools and the media and everything and educate people from the root what is in food. Because most people are getting their information from advertising. Now, when I lived in America, in Washington, D.C., and I love the American breakfast, but I saw the Americans going around frantically looking for low-fat butter, low-fat milk, and then going to the donuts and pouring the... and I don't know if that has changed, but if the Secretary delivers his passion all over the country, I think we'll see big improvements. But we have to understand food. Thank you.
Ed would like to comment. Okay.
That, please.
Just quickly point out that we are teaming up with the Irish government. My department is teaming up with the Irish government because they've just taken over the presidency of the EU. And the one thing, and you'll appreciate this, Janet, the one thing the Irish government is trying to do is develop a whole European community information about cardiovascular diseases. And they're working in conjunction with the NIH, my Department of Health and Human Services. We're teaming up to try and build an educational program. It's not dealing directly with food, but for cardiovascular, we're trying to have the whole European community develop a more expertise on cardiovascular, and I hope you know that.
Great, Antony.
Yeah,
Antony and then Ed.
Can I just react on this? I think what you're saying is absolutely crucial. And it's one of the areas where the food industry has recognized that it has something that it can improve upon. So you will be seeing that the food industry in future will start drastically improving the information on food. Not always on packs, but also on the web. We will be using various ways so that people can make better informed choices. And I have no problem to say that this is an area where we can remarkably improve upon.
Great, Ed.
It's not a million miles away, but in Northern Ireland, our sister organisation, the General Council for Consumers in Northern Ireland, was responsible for putting on every school table a mat, so that when children eat their school foods on the mat, it gives them some basic hygiene and food education advice, and maybe we can feed that into the European programme. But if I also had a plea to businesses, particularly those businesses that are looking at the health and nutritious food and the kind of the opportunities that I hope will be there, is please don't overclaim. The comment about science earlier also needs to kind of feed through. Please, can we not have claims, because it's so easy to say, no, this is healthy or that's not healthy, but we all know the sugar drinks that are high in vitamin C, but then they've got lots of sugar, or the low-fat yogurts that are stacked full of sugar, or indeed the low-carb produce that the same. And within the European Union, there's a regulation going through, and I think it's a good example of enabling regulation, to make clear that consumers should be protected around health claims, because if we can trust as consumers what business is giving us, not just the kind of complex recommended daily allowance and nutritional profiles, but also the claims around healthy food, if that can be trusted, I think there's much more chance.
Can I quote you?
Jump in. Yeah.
Can I quote you from Unilever Food and Beverage Marketing Principles? This is mandatory within Unilever, and I can assure you this is not only in Unilever, but every responsible foods company has this. And I'll quote you the second line. Nutrition and health benefits should have a sound scientific basis. End of story. If we find a brand manager who makes a claim, which is a bogus claim, he gets fired. End of story. Okay? So business is doing this. Yes?
I think that is very positive. It's because if you make a false claim, then you're always going to get into trouble. There's no question about that. It's that what is healthy food? Health and nutrition is a very complex, multi-layered process. And if we end up claiming kind of benefits, in terms of health, in terms of certain vitamins, but then you're losing out on other things, it's a more ambiguous area. And so I would hope that we evolve codes and methods that can ensure that the wider claims are not simply scientifically based, but aren't bamboozling consumers who face a lot of these claims in the marketplace.
Now, I need to ask the World Economic Forum people if we've run out of time or if we can go on a few minutes. Can anyone? Do I have 15 minutes? Oh, fantastic. Okay, I promised Dean, but Dean, there's about 100 people who want to ask, so let's start going through the question, the Q&A pretty fast, because I want to get to everybody. Yes, we need a microphone.
I'm not going to take much time. I'm Dean Ornish. I'm from San Francisco, and I just wanted to first salute the forum for having this and echo Secretary Thompson's comments about how happy it is just to see that this forum and Carla Beckman and everyone else who made it possible. I've spent the last 25 years doing research on diet and lifestyle. We've been able to show that you can actually reverse heart disease by changing diet and lifestyle, and therefore you can prevent it. More recently, we've been able to show you can stop or reverse the progression of prostate cancer, and by extension, probably breast cancer through similar kinds of changes. So I have a strong interest the last 25 years in this work. And I've never been so optimistic as I am now because of the potential collaboration between the public and private sectors. Secretary Thompson, I salute you for your leadership. I have never seen anyone close in that position to do what you've been doing. And I also wanted to use PepsiCo as an example of a private partnership because I've been working with Todd McKenzie, Nestor Carbonell, and their colleagues there. I approached this with a lot of skepticism, and as you might imagine. But for the last 2.5 years, I've been deeply impressed by what one company has been able to do in terms of modifying the more indulgent foods to make them better for you, and also to develop foods that are truly good for you, and to find that, as Secretary Thompson indicated, that much of the growth in their revenues are from these foods. And the last thing I want to say is that what excites me about it is that they're in the behavioral modification business too. And to use the advertising, the celebrities, the resources, the public relations like Richard Edelman and others, to make it fun and sexy and hip and tasty and convenient to eat healthfully, to use that to help educate kids in schools about exercise and stress management, as well as how to eat, are to me the kind of practical solutions that really transcend liberal, Democrat, Republican, liberal, conservative, Republican, Democrat, all the things that usually polarize us. These are profoundly human issues that can really bring us all together.
Great, thanks, Dean. And there's a lady over there, right there, great.
Again, I was impressed by what governments and companies are doing. I just would like to mention that in England, and I think it's Imperial College, recently did a very small study, grant you, but they're working more on it, that in the study they found all the obese people were missing one certain gene. So I'm just wondering if the panel feel that as important as exercise and nutrition is it worth to put money into research to find other ways that may be causing also the problem and not just go on this important track that we know works?
We're all pointing at Francis Collins, the renowned geneticist. Maybe
I'm wondering if we could
Francis.
have Francis Collins answer that question. He's from the NIH, and he is one of the world's great experts in this.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I'm at NIH in Tommy Thompson's department, and certainly I'm glad that was raised because I was about to raise the question myself. We should not assume that what we currently know about the biology of obesity is all we'll ever know. The opportunities now are tremendous to unravel this in terms of what are the molecules that are involved in appetite, what makes you hungry, what might we be able to do about that, what about diabetes, why are some people susceptible and others not, what can we do to make early predictions and warn those who are at highest risk to take these steps before they're already pre-diabetic or full-blown diabetics. Obesity, after all, has strong hereditary roots. They're rare causes where whole families are affected in a very strongly genetic way, but even the regular form of obesity, about 60% of the body mass index, the BMI, that we measure is the most common measure of one's tendency towards obesity. About 60% of that is heredity. And so it's no surprise, perhaps, when you consider that our species has had its genome honed by 100,000 years of occasional awful famines. And the way that we got through was to be very efficient at handling calories and hanging on to those precious calories to get us through when they just weren't around. And now, of course, those are turning around and getting us in trouble when calories are more plentiful. So I think you should anticipate over the course of the next few years, building on things like an understanding of the genome, a host of other interesting things going on both in the public sector and in the pharmaceutical and biotechnology industry, that we're going to learn a lot more about the ways in which obesity comes about. But I guess I'd like to ask the panel about how this might play out in a fashion that could be good, but could also perhaps take the wind out of the sails of this very important initiatives that you all have been talking about, which I share enthusiasm for. Suppose that in 4 years or something like that, a very enterprising biotechnology company comes up with a drug that really does work for obesity. And it's not one of those diet pills that has all of these other problems, that it really is targeted towards the pathway of understanding where appetite comes from, and it's very successful. And it costs them money. And people who take it, particularly if they're morbidly obese or if they're diabetic, benefit hugely from that. And we all benefit because our healthcare costs go down. But other people who don't perhaps really need it for medical purposes will clamor for it. It will become another lifestyle drug because they won't really want to exercise. They won't really want to watch their diet. They'll want to have a pill. Right. And there will be economic pressures. There will be this big issue about who has access to this across the world in particular. That will be very destabilizing. Are we ready for that? Because I think it's probably coming.
All right, Janet, then Richard they want to respond.
I think what you've described is what happens in every single introduction of a pharmaceutical product. And what we discussed the other day, the innovative products go first to the most wealthy in any population. If you look at the obesity issue, there's a real social gradient, so that the most obese people, even within the United States, are the lower socioeconomic classes. And it actually has a bias, a racial bias, that the obesity rates in African American populations and in Hispanic populations are highest. Therefore, they probably will not be the ones, if they are not having the full health insurance, will not be the first ones to have access to this particular innovation. If you look at the rest of the world, the same is true. Today, if you look in any of the countries I've mentioned, India, look in Africa, look in China, they're not even getting high blood pressure medication today. Okay, and there is actually medication that's available, that's cost effective. They don't have that. So the chances that what you're describing is going to reach everyone who's obese or overweight are very slim, at least in my lifetime.
Richard.
I'd like to echo something Tony Burgmans said the other night at the food and pharma dinner. He called for a coalition of the two industries on this issue. I think one of the greatest dangers is that we get into this hype game. Interferon was the magic bullet, as you remember, in 1980s. And if we all of a sudden can postpone the urgency of this issue, it's going to have a terrible effect. And, you know, I think that there's a tendency to this in pharma. And you know, you want to have a good result. I think the pharma industries recognize this, and they're into compliance. And they're also into not disease treatment, but behavior modification. They've embraced a broader circle of responsibility. And I think that the two industries really have to work together, Tony.
Okay, there's a gentleman back here, and then Susan Blumenthal.
Hi, my name is
Yes.
Mike Friedman. I'd like to address this to you, Mr. Mayo, and to Senator Thompson. You mentioned, Mr. Mayo, that obesity is a marker of poverty. Another, even more hyped-up issue in Europe is the use of GM foods. Is there anything your organization is doing to promote the use of GM foods, which might provide vegetables and fruits to a greater variety of people at lower cost? And if not, how do you square that with your concerns about obesity? And Secretary Thompson, I would ask you also, what, if anything, are you doing in your work with the European Commission to try to open up that market within Europe for GM foods?
Well, I confess that we're not doing anything to promote GM foods within a UK or European context. And one of the reasons that consumers have been nervous about GM foods within, the European context is because they haven't seen any direct benefit. Mobile phones are supposed to kind of kill the brains in our cells, but the cells in our brains, but people are willing to take that risk because there's a benefit. Actually, so consumers haven't seen in a European context cheaper food and cheaper vegetables as a result of GM. Were that to come about, then attitudes may change.
But Ed, isn't it more about the developing world and helping farmers produce pest-resistant crops and making the food available there?
Well, certainly. There are two issues in terms of a developing world context, and Janet, I mean, you'd be as well to talk to this as anybody. The first type of food insecurity is poverty and malnutrition. And we know that there's a good deal the link with democracy, the link with effective demand, so people have the money to do it. It's not simply a question of whether GM food kind of will feed the world. I've yet to be convinced by any of the kind of the arguments and cases that have been put up that it represents a magic bullet. In the same way we talked about earlier, was this magic bullet, which I thought was a completely legitimate question. If that appeared, of course we'd all embrace it. But actually, if we can't wait necessarily on the promise of that being so, and so we're going to have to go both routes. We're going to have to go, on the one hand, towards what I think is actually a kind of a radical re-engineering of health systems, away from a model where people can be cured, because there will be a lot of people with chronic diseases and long-term conditions, away from acute-based hospital-based services that are kind of the center of the universe, towards a wider sense of health development that really equips patients to be kind of co-creators of their own health through diet and exercise and literacy. But on the other hand, we're going to have to keep a very open mind towards all of the new technological developments that could really play a part within this. And my own plea is that in those technological developments, we build people's trust and understanding of those technologies as we go through, not come up with kind of headline answers and slogans that people are supposed to buy, because at the moment in Europe, consumers are not buying that argument.
Okay, we have a question here and yes. Oh, did he? Okay.
Could I respond?
Yes,
please?
of course.
First off, GM food is more in the province of the trade representative and the Department of Agriculture. But the truth of the matter is, when I was governor, I did appear in front of the European Committee and the European Community Parliament to talk about GO food and opening up the market. I'm very much in favor of it because our scientists and researchers in America have examined it 7 different ways from Sunday and have come up find that it's very safe and that it allows for the opportunities to produce enough food to help individual countries that are really poverty-stricken. I look only at the one example. I believe it was Zimbabwe in Africa, which turned down corn that was GO corn, and they were starving to death, but the government would not let them use proper certified corn. And to me, that is really an absurdity. And I think all of us have to recognize this. And all of our scientists have looked at it, and not all of our scientists, but the good science has been taking place, have found that this is very safe, nutritious, and food that can be grown easier and more available to those countries that really need it.
Okay, we have a bunch of questions. Susan, why don't you go, and then someone over here has been raising their hand for a long time. Okay.
Susan Blumenthal, Assistant Surgeon General. I work for Secretary Thompson to put prevention first and to try to transform our healthcare systems from being sick care systems to real healthcare systems that emphasize prevention. I think in the 21st century, to this question about the magic bullet, in the 21st century, we're blessed with 2 strategies for prevention. We can do molecular prevention because of work in the human genome. Hopefully one day we'll be able to repair genes, and about 50 genes have been associated with obesity today. But we also have to invest more in behavioral and environmental strategies because the doubling in obesity rates that have occurred for kids in the United States and the rates that we heard in Malaysia and Brazil and other parts of the world, with 300 million obese people worldwide and 1 billion overweight, did not come from our genes changing in 20 years. Therefore, we really have to take a public health approach that works at the individual level, educating consumers, healthcare providers, mobilizing communities and governments and businesses to work together in the kinds of partnerships that have been described and have been fostered by Secretary Thompson and the panelists here today. But one day we will add to this arsenal, hopefully, therapies that can change genes that have been environmentally modified. But in the meantime, I think it's critical that we take this broad-based public health approach and foster partnerships, which really is the cornerstone to our work in public health today.
Great, thank you.
Hello, my name is Mary Ackenhusen, and I work in the Canadian healthcare system. And my question is related to what I struggle with every day, trying to make these budgets work. And as the aging demographics that we know will increase healthcare costs, along with obesity-related diseases, we have a potential crisis facing us. So we look at the tobacco example as a positive example that in 20, 30, 40 decades, we've reduced by perhaps half tobacco consumption. I wonder if that kind of positive example, if that's a good benchmark, because I see this as more of a crisis than that. And so perhaps Mr. Thompson, in terms of the gentle approach, it's a good approach. And I like lots of examples you've given around the healthcare insurance companies and trying to get some positive incentives. If that's going to be enough to really make as much of a difference as I believe we need to make.
I'm not absolutely positive that it is, but I'm willing to go down this path as far as it leads productivity and successes. And if it doesn't, then we have to look at different ways in which we're going to drive changes. And that may be over-regulate, or not over, but regulations. It may be taxation. It may be other kinds of publicity. But right now, for the first time, obesity is front and center. And how long has it been, that we've ever had this particular discussion like this? Never at the World Economic Forum, to the best of my knowledge, have we had a discussion like this. That is positive. And I think we're starting to focus, and I think a lot of food industry, food companies are responding positively. And I think the more that they do, and another positive point that's been raised a couple times, but I think has not really registered is that good quality foods right now are good for the bottom line. And that nothing drives corporations better than a good bottom line. And I know PepsiCo will tell you that the reason that they're going to higher nutrition and better nutrition, one of the reasons is that this is the one that the public is demanding. And if we can get the public relations, if we can get the consumer organizations, the food companies, government, all working together, I think we can positively change attitudes and really start seeing results. And that's why I want to go this path for as long as it bears fruit.
All right, one last sorry.
Second. I don't like the language. You say the soft approach. This is not a soft approach. This is the tough approach. You know what a soft approach is? Legislate. And then 10 years later we'll find out that it isn't working. Like many things in legislation don't work. This is the difficult and the high road. This is not the soft road.
One last question, and then we have to wrap up.
Mike Garrett from Nestle. If maybe this is the topic for the next year's discussion rather than the one today, but one more comment on GMO. GMO, well, another point first before that, back off. Today the population of the world is 6 billion people. By the year 2025, this will be about 8 billion people. We will need roughly 2 times the protein that are being produced today if we are to feed the world. So that's maybe obesity is a problem today. We can have another major problem in a few years' time, remembering that today there are 800 million people in the world who earn less than $1 a day and therefore are starving. So we've got another issue. GMO is very, very unfortunate because it became an issue. It was very badly sold by the seed and the agroscience industry. We as Nestle, incidentally, we couldn't care less whether we produce a product from or not from GMO. We have no vested interest in GMO at all. However, it arrived at a time when there was a trade war between America and Europe as far as bananas were concerned. This was turned from being a political, economic issue into a social issue. And today in Europe, GMO is equivalent to kosher or halal, any of these kind of consumption habits. The problem for the developing world, and you take Thailand, and we're saying, let's not have GMO products, we don't need them. We can't take the risk. Thailand cannot produce GMO, use GMO to feed the population there, because 50% of their crop is exported, and 50% of their exports come to Europe. The moment they start to use GMO seed, they can no longer sell it in the world. This is a crisis, and it has to be dealt with. It has to be dealt with between the science base of the American authorities, the proper people, the WHO, and so on and so forth. And this is probably going to be a big issue for the future, because if we don't use technology like GMO, then we will have a water shortage in the world, which we will all not be able to face at all.
All right, well, thank you for everybody for your questions and comments. On behalf of the audience, I feel very, very encouraged by what I've heard today. Let's all go and work on prevention and encouraging people to adopt healthy eating lifestyles. Thank you very much, everybody.